Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this critical moment. I am the CEO of Faith in Public Life, and Faith in Public Life is a nationwide network of leaders that engage in bold moral action that affirms progressive values and dignity for all. I want to start not with my words, but with my words of the Reverend Denise Walden Glenn, who is the executive director of Voice Buffalo, an interfaith community organizing network. She said, "We lost 10 of our neighbors to white supremacist violence. This kind of hate is not created in a vacuum. It is the product of unexamined and unfiltered extremism propagated by centuries-old system of racism that undergird this country. Black and brown communities are in a state of emergency. For anyone who is serious about ending racism in this country, it's time to put in the work to dismantle machineries of hate and invest in systems that actually keep us safe." That is what we are here to do, friends. We are here to mourn, to learn, and to figure out how to take action together as we demand an end to the spread of the dehumanizing and hateful rhetoric that contributes to violence and to lives lost. But first, let us begin with prayerful music and inspiration and a reflection. And I call on the Reverend Paisha Thomas, and thank you, Paisha, for your gifts today.
Thank you. It's a prayer. The song is called Water Wash. Water wash, wash away, cleanse me from yesterday, heal my soul, make me whole. Water wash, wash away. River, carry me to a place where my shame is cast away, and my body won't betray who I am. Wash away. My spirit rises, awake at night, crying out with all her might to see her liberty. If she could free herself, where would she go? Oh, when she's free. And when finally I lay me down, I'm gonna wear a golden crown, and my freedom finally found who I am. Wash away, wash away, wash away, wash away, yeah, wash away.
Thank you so much, Reverend Thomas. And now I'd like to ask Reverend Jackie Lewis, the senior pastor at Middle Church and the author of an incredible book, Fierce Love, to ground us in this moment with a reflection.
Thank you, everyone. So sad for what brings us together today, but also really honored to be in this circle of colleagues who are all doing amazing, healing, beautiful work in the world. guided by their faith, guided by their love, and guided by their passion. So, of course, I join all of my friends here praying for all of our family in Buffalo and California who are suffering, wounded by this latest horrific display of gun violence. When I was asked to ground us, I first thought I would kind of talk stats and numbers and remind us of how many times we've been here, mourning people killed in a gurdwara, in a sanctuary, a grocery store, in a dance club, in a block party, on the street corner, in a Walmart, in a FedEx. But I want to take you to what's been comforting me in these crazy times, along with the activism and fierce revolutionary love of all the people in this Zoom's square and yours as well. What's grounded me is a great cloud of witness that has gone before me, my forebearers, my grandparents, my big mama and her mama, who were grounded in faith that defied death. There's this crazy book in the Christian scriptures that's John of Patmos's Revelation, an apocalypse. And we think apocalypse means the end of times, but actually it means to reveal or to peel back or to show. And John had this wild vision in his time where there was a beast that was like Babylon, a big, horrific kind of nation state, if you will, that crushed people to the ground with oppression and violence. And in the end, his vision is of a healed and whole world. Our Jewish friends would say tikkun olam. And let me just say, that calls me out of my sorrow. It calls me into a place of doing what Rabbi Hartman says, Daniel Hartman, that a moral life, a courageous life, is learning how to see. So I'm going to share this with you, hoping that we can see something together about how we might move forward and get guns off the street, get hate out of the airwaves, get more love in our classrooms, in our conversations, in our politics, so together we might all flourish and survive. Listen for this radical vision of hope. From Revelation 21, 1-6. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among the people. God will dwell with them. They will be God's people, and God will be with them and be their God. God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more, mourning and crying and pain no more. For the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." In this vision, the sea is like all of the chaos, all the violence, all the centuries of white supremacy that has us on our knees crying and praying. In this vision, the sea is hegemonies that are intractable. In this vision, the sea is all of the places where 18-year-olds learn how to get in cars and drive 3 hours to go hunt Black people. But the promise is that however we imagine God, however we see God, as love, as peace, as shalom, as Yahweh, as G-O-D, all of the ways we might name this presence, this force of love in the world, is so present among the people. We don't even need streetlights. We don't even need temples and synagogues and mosques and gurdwaras. The people hold the love. The people hold the light. And because they hold the light, they love each other into healing. No more mourning, no more pain, no more death. That's lofty and maybe a little crazy. but I'm trying to see my way into partnerships of hope-making, revolutionary partnerships that break down barriers and decide that we together can make a nation in which the right to bear arms does not supersede the right to live, in which we stop fighting each other about abortion and care instead for the children alive amongst us, in which we dismantle the white supremacist ideologies that even have taken hold in my religion, in Christianity, and really march toward fierce love together. My prayer is, as we mourn, as we grieve, that our grief will be prophetic. My prayer is that as we cry, our tears will moisten our imagination so we can see our way toward a politic that includes justice, that all of our lives of faith will be rich with the ability to stand hand in hand against the derision that is caused by whiteness, that system that plagues us all, that infects all of our systems. And my prayer is, one day, we won't have to gather like this to make plans for how to keep each other alive, that we will have fixed what's broken together, aided by our faith in the holy, however we name it and know it. I'm praying with you that we'll be grounded in a holy imagination to see the world as God desires it. May it be so. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Jackie, for that vision of hope, for speaking from the heart in this very difficult moment, especially for your community.
Thank you, my sister.
It's really good to be with you. And that's what gives me hope too, is the solidarity. And not only solidarity in this moment, but also, like you said, that we're connected to ancestors, people who've gone beyond before us, people who will come after us. I'd like to turn to our panelists here. We have an incredible array of folks here to help us engage this moment. I'm so grateful for each of you. And the first thing we'd like to talk about is, this is not just about left and right. This is not about progressive and conservative. This is about human dignity. How do we help people understand that? How do we understand that this is part of what has plagued our country since its beginning? And what is it that must be torn from the root in order to have that reimagined world in which we can all thrive? The world that Reverend Lewis just read from the book of Revelation, this new heaven and new earth. What is it that must be torn from the root? And how do we explain to people this is not about partisanship? Can I call on Dr. Jones, even as the scholar in residence, for a moment to talk about what is this? What are we seeing in Buffalo? How does it relate even to religion, which might not be immediately apparent in some ways, at least initially was not.
There we go. Unmute. Thank you. Well, Reverend Jackie, that was amazing. So thank you for kind of getting us grounded and oriented in the right way at the beginning. My heart's been really heavy. It's recalled to me some of the words of James Baldwin that have always stayed with me. Not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And we have not just only barely begun facing what this actually is in front of us. And, you know, Jen, I think you're right that there may not be the obvious right in front of them, connection. But, you know, if we go back in our history, we know that this idea of white supremacy, white dominance, and this fear of replacement, which we're seeing, that clearly was at front and center in the murderer's mind and in his writing. And if you just, barely, it's not that hard to make the connections. You know, I think back to the, so I'm from the South, grew up Southern Baptist. I think back to the KKK. They were always talking about white genocide and the fear of replacement, and what they were protecting. this is often forgotten, they were protecting a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian vision of America. That's why they were anti-Semitic. That's why they were anti-Catholic, because this vision of America, and this is really the center of it, this vision of a white Christian America is the thing that is being protected. It's the thing that's being killed for. And, you know, we saw it again from Mississippi. Ross Barnett's campaign in the KKK in the 20s, early part of the 20th century, 1960s. Ross Barnett, running for governor on the stump, regularly talks about white genocide. He was also, at the same time, he was the head of the men's Sunday school department at First Baptist Church, the most influential church in the state of Mississippi. And when he won his overtly segregationist campaign, running on this fear of white replacement in the wake of the early civil rights movement, the church awarded him a big pulpit Bible and blessed him in a big sanctification service at First Baptist Church, Dallas. So these things have always been connected, you know, in the U.S. And just a couple of numbers here, since you know, I put on my PRI hat. We know that these views of white Christian nationalism, fears of great replacement, and propensities toward violence, these are all connected in a thread. So, for example, there's a large overlap between those who hold Christian nationalist views and beliefs in this so-called great replacement theory. So, for example, among white Americans who believe America was intended by God to be a promised land for European Christians, they are 3 times as likely as those who disagree with that statement to believe that immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background, 65% to 22%. Again, that's the influence of holding a white national or white Christian nationalist view, connects directly to this thing. And both of these things are connected to violence. So again, among white Americans who agree that God intended America to be a promised land for European Christians, they are 4 times as likely as those who disagree with that statement to believe that true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save the country. Among white Americans who believe that immigrants are invading the country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background, that is the kind of great replacement theory, they are nearly 6 times as likely as those who disagree with that statement to believe that true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. So I'll wrap with that. But the last thing just this past weekend, I was in Minneapolis, and I was at George Floyd Square, and I also took a tour of Native American sacred sites around Minneapolis. And Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs, who's a member of the Mohican Nation and also a member of the Minnesota Council of Churches, ended his talk. And I was sitting there with about 30 people from the Evangelical Covenant Church, so 30 all white people in this thing. And I'll end with his words. I think they're apropos for us today, particularly those of us who are white and Christian. He said, look, you know, I don't need white Christians to be more informed. I don't need white Christians to be smarter. I need white Christians to be better. So here's to us being better.
Amen to that. Those are some frightening numbers, and amen to us being better. Lisa Sharon Harper, I know your book, Fortune, really roots itself, grounds itself in history, the history of your own family. Can you comment on, give us some analysis on where we're at as a country? What do we need to know?
Yeah, when I was researching for Fortune, I found that my family stretches back 10 generations to 1682, when the first immigrant person came who was not indigenous, and they intersect then with the very first race laws that were planted on this soil. The first race law was planted in 1662, and the next one followed 2 years after that. First one was Virginia, second one was Maryland. In Virginia, the problem they were trying to solve for on the ground, as all law does, was the problem of mixed race children that were confusing the racial caste system that they had been judicially and also culturally setting in place over the last decades from that point. But now they needed legislation because judicial rulings were now ruling in favor of Black children, mixed race children who had white fathers. Why? Because citizenship came through the line of the father. And citizenship then, according to English law, made it impossible then for you to enslave someone. You couldn't enslave another citizen. So here in these very first laws, race laws, you see the seeds of what we are fighting right now. You see that the source of citizenship was actually shifted. That was their way to solve the problem. No longer would they suffer mixed race children walking off the plantations and claiming their freedom and actually being ruled free by the courts. Instead, they said, we're going to shift citizenship to go through the line of the mother. So here in the very first race law, you have the confluence, the intersection of race, gender, and citizenship, all in the same law. And then soon after that, in Maryland, over a period of years, it all worked down to the same thing. If your mother was white, you couldn't be enslaved. And ultimately, it had to do with the fact that you were then a citizen. So the question of what does it mean? What does it mean to be a citizen? That was England. That was a British colony, but it didn't change once the revolution happened. In fact, it only got further entrenched. In the very first Congress, a compromise was made north to south. And in order to gerrymander, to do the very first gerrymander, where they counted Black bodies as in order to boost the amount of representation in the South, they gerrymandered and compromised Black life. They called us 3/5 of a human being. 3 years later, they said in the very first Immigration Act of 1790 that only white men of good character, free white men, could be naturalized. Why would that be? Because naturalization offers the opportunity to exercise dominion on the land, offers the opportunity to exercise agency, to shape the world. And just like Dr. Jones said, the imagination of what this world was supposed to be was not for everyone. It was for white people. In fact, Ben Franklin argued that fact, and he even argued that it shouldn't even just be white, it should be the English, because after all, we discovered this land, right? The Germans were going to muddy the race, according to Ben Franklin. So this is the struggle that we have struggled through. It's the question of, what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to be created with the call of God to exercise agency on this land? And it's not, in every generation we have a struggle. And our struggle right now is actually suffering our very democracy. It is putting our very democracy, that's my dog, my very democracy at risk, our very democracy at risk. And the reason for that is because the fascism that was known, oh my goodness, you can go on, girl.
She agrees. She agrees.
The fascism that was located in the South, and the slaveocracy, has now gone all over the country. And it's gone not only into the Midwest, but into the West, into the North. And now we see 48 states tried to pass voter suppression laws last year. So what we saw in Buffalo over the weekend was simply a clear manifestation of what we have been seeing in our nation from its very beginnings.
Oh, my Lord. It's from the beginning, nothing new. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Lawson, would you give us a word from your sense, from your community, from your understanding analysis of this moment?
I'm happy to, but I thought I saw in the chat that someone wanted to go right after Lisa.
Oh, good. Who was that? I'm sorry. Not tracking the chat. Let me scroll down here. Dr. Love, please.
No, please, Rabbi Lawson, please, and I'll follow her.
Okay. First of all, thank you for reaching out to me. And as you can imagine, I have a lot of interest in my time, and I do try to give my time where it's needed. So I'm glad that you reached out to me, and I'm glad to be on this panel. And it's so good. I'm also glad to I was nodding when Lisa was talking, because I talk about Benjamin Franklin, I talk about British, and to be on this panel where I'm not the only person that knows these things is cool. But what I will add to all of this awesomeness, and I'm just really having a fan moment because I know many of you online or have your books or some combination of both, that what I what I try to help people understand is that this is the DNA of this country. This country was founded on the values of one group of people having power over another group of people, one people having control over other people. And that has evolved over time, and many other groups have been allowed to assimilate into whiteness. And with this, this replacement theory, it is just the same stuff repackaged so it doesn't smell so bad. And for many people who are white, and some of the people that I've engaged with, and some of the Jews that I've engaged with online, from like a Jewish, let me back up a minute, from like a Jewish perspective, the first Jews that immigrated to this country came from South America, or came from, they immigrated, they were kicked out of Spain in 1492, and they made their way to the Americas. And we could make an argument that those folks were brown. Eventually, many of those people assimilated into American culture. A lot of their history was lost, but they were responsible for building some of the earliest synagogues in this country. Ever since then, every subsequent wave of immigration of Jews have come from Eastern Europe. And when Jews first came to this country, when that wave of Jews from Eastern Europe came to this country, they weren't seen as white. They weren't, because they had not assimilated into whiteness. And over time, around the middle of the 20th century, many Jews who benefit from white privilege have assimilated into whiteness. But that whiteness is conditional or provisional, because Jews who benefit from whiteness can benefit from whiteness and white privilege and suffer from anti-Semitism. Both can be true at the same time. And that is a very difficult conversation that's happening in the Jewish world right now, as many Jews understand that and struggle with it, and also try to have more nuanced ways of talking about race, because talking about race in the Jewish community is challenging because we have been murdered for being a race. And many people who are white in the Jewish community also espouse some of the same racist ideas, and they feel like they can do it because they're not seen as, they're not white. And I'm like, these ideas are part of assimilating into the culture of the United States. And by benefiting from whiteness, you've actually bought into the DNA of all this country, of all the stuff in this country. So people say, my parents immigrated, my grandparents immigrated. If you are an American citizen, you are part of the fabric of the DNA, and you can choose to be racist, or you could choose to be anti-racist, basically. And so for like some of the online conversations I was having, and I'll wrap this up in a minute, is that many people believe in the Jewish community that what happened in Buffalo and his manifesto is this new thing called replacement theory. And it's not. It is, like I said, it's a new thing repackaged, not new, but it's just been repackaged so it doesn't smell so bad. And that has been really hard for some of the people that I've talked to, because they are seeing this 18-year-old boy, he's a man, but calling him a boy, and saying that he has bought into this new theory, and it's not new. He has bought into something, and it's going to get him a life sentence probably, but it is not, we should not feel sorry for him. What we should feel sorry for, well, not sorry, we should understand is that politicians who use these talking points, they don't care. It's all about power. It's all about gaining access. It's all about making sure that they stay in control.
Power and control. Mm-hmm. Reverend Love.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with all of you, and to meet new friends and to see some old friends. So thank you. My approach is really around the work that I do for the United Church of Christ, and my lifelong work has really centered in African pedagogy, and to go back further than 1619, and ways in which we began to decenter whiteness, and we began to decolonize ourselves and resocialize ourselves. Because being a part of the cultural, I call myself a cultural historian because I look at the space in which we live. Humans have only been on this planet for 200,000 years. And yet the rhetoric that comes out of white supremacy is cultivated and perpetuated through this doctrine of discovery that claimed that there were no people on the land, that land was discovered. And so until we re-educate our communities around this doctrine and ways in which we begin to have this intentional dialogue, you know, when I do this work, it is around teaching people of African descent, they're the builders of civilization on their continent, and that there were warriors that fought against colonialism in the 1800s. And so I believe in this moment, we have to use some new tools. We continue to talk about white supremacy that centers whiteness. We need to begin to talk about centering our siblings of color, our Native American siblings, our faith communities of color as well, because we can have these conversations with predominantly European groups, right? And if we look at the population, this whole conversation is people of European descent are only 16% of the world population. Asians are 52%, and people of color in the Latin African American are almost 30%. And so we have to begin to have a different conversation in this moment and how we educate our communities. Part of this also, when I'm looking at Buffalo, the grief, there's something missing about looking at humanity as sacred among our politicians, among communities where people believe that they are socialized as white. Because those Europeans that came, they were not white. They were from the British Isles. They came from Scotland. They came from Ireland. They were not white. They were subsumed into whiteness. And this long history of whiteness has been allowed to even infiltrate our educational systems, our political systems, our social systems. And so we have to do a better job of dismantling those systems. And that is the work that I believe that in this moment, but we also have to take care of communities that are grieving. And we have to take care of communities that are hurting. This is going to happen again. And so we can have these conversations about white supremacy, but I believe we need to have conversations about how we equip and protect communities, as well as educate our communities to begin to think about what protection looks like. And I believe that there is an opportunity for synagogues and churches and people on the streets to do this work. The ways in which we watched those young folks across the globe galvanize and protest during the murder of George Floyd. That energy has to be reclaimed, and it has to be spoken to in a way that we come together and have this conversation across faiths and across communities. And so I think that's not just a start. We've done it before. Coming out of, the Black church, we used to do it in the church. Then how do we move together and re-educate and talk about the history in a way that allows us to be even more prophetic around the ways in which we talk about culture? So that when we're talking about culture, we're talking about our siblings. It's not to exclude the white community. It is to help them understand that they are not a majority and we are not a minority. And I think if we change our language and the way in which we educate, we can do a better job of being proactive around the protection and helping people understand very clearly that we need to figure out together how we do this on both ends, the community organizing, the political, as well as the education.
So it's cultural, not just political, and not just the education. There's a cultural change that's faith-based, and that sense of solidarity. I want to move us into this conversation about what do we do and how do we work from our faith traditions to make change. I wonder, Valerie, if I can bring you in here. How do you draw strength from your faith, and how do you communicate out in a time like this where, I go from rage to despair? How do our faith traditions sustain us? How do we build in coalition? What word of wisdom do you have for us on that front?
Let me first say that just listening to you all has been medicine for me today. Thank you. I have been organizing around white nationalist hate for 21 years, since a family friend was killed by white supremacists after 9/11. So I've been organizing around this since before this particular killer was born. And what I've seen in my adult life is how that violence has become more organized, more frequent, more effective, and more efficient at taking life. And how, unlike 20 years ago, we now have a world where they're connected in a global network so that every shooter leaves behind a manifesto that inspires the next. So the Buffalo killer was inspired by the manifesto left behind in Christchurch, who was in turn inspired. So there's a connection between Charleston and El Paso and in Pittsburgh and Poway and Oak Creek. And even though the media continues to frame these as isolated lone incidents, we know, as all the speakers have powerfully painted a picture of white supremacist forces that helped found the nation. And so the time for awakening is now. For any act of racial violence must be nurtured in the shared public imagination before finding outward expression. And this newest manifestation, Rabbi is correct, this newest version, which is actually an old version of replacement theory, has come to a point where nearly half of all Republicans polled espouse to this theory. So the solution, my loves, is what I pull from my faith, Jen, that we need sound government, yes, and we need just policies, especially around gun violence. That is just the minimum. But the only way we will begin to birth the America we dream, an America that is safe for all of us, is if we create a shift in consciousness and culture, a way of seeing each other, a way of being with each other that leaves no one outside of our circle of care. I call it a revolution of the heart. Anti-racism is the bridge. Beloved community is the destination. And for that, it's not enough to be known. We must be loved. We must develop the capacities to love one another, block to block, heart to heart. For as Robbie's research shows us, in the next 20 years, we know that the number of people of color in this nation will exceed the number of white people. And we're at a crossroads. Will we continue to teeter on the brink of a kind of civil war? Or will we birth a nation that has never been? A nation made up of other nations, a truly multiracial, multi-faith democracy. And that labor is long and that labor is hard. So the wisdom of the midwife, when she says to breathe, my love, and this is breathing for me, and then push. If beloved community is the destination, then every single one of us has a role to play. Every single one of us has a sphere of influence. So what can you do? What can we do to be brave with our grief? Let grief in, for grief is the price of love. If you're grieving, Buffalo, don't be afraid of that discomfort. Grieve in community, for the deeper we can grieve, the deeper we expand our capacity to love. And then harness your rage. Rage is not the opposite of love. It's not antithetical to our faith traditions. Think of the rage in Jesus's eyes when he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple, right? Rage is the force we harness to protect that which we love. Divine rage is what I call that harnessed energy. The aim of divine rage is not vengeance. It is to reorder the world. And so scream and vent and curse. I was just on the phone with my girlfriends, like you'd shake like our ancestor did. Dance, run, scream, shake. All of that moving, that energy to the outside of us gives us information. But what information does my rage carry? How do I wish to use that for what I do in the world? And then that using it is that next step. Step away to rage, return to listen, reimagine solutions together from where you are. And every single one of us has something that we can do that's a little bolder, a little braver than what we have done before. If any of this is speaking to you, these practices that I call revolutionary love, you all can go to seenostranger.com. We have a learning hub that has these portals around grieving, around raging, and around reimagining community together. For this is what I know to be true. Every time I feel like I'm hovering at the edge of the abyss, looking into the caskets, the open caskets of family members who look like my family from the mass shooting in Oak Creek, I remember that moment, the doors of the gymnasium flung open just when I felt like I was going to collapse and disappear into the despair, and thousands of people came in, people of all races and faiths, to grieve with us. They didn't even know us, but they sat with us to grieve with us, 3,000 people. You don't have to know people in order to grieve with them. You grieve with them in order to know them. And every time in US history, when people who had no obvious reason to love one another came together to grieve and to organize, they gave birth to new relationships, even revolutions. That is what this moment demands.
Thank you, Valerie. Now we're getting into the wisdom portion of this webinar. Who else wants to contribute some wisdom and spiritual practice for this moment?
I'll go. Oh, go ahead. Do you want to go, Lisa? Or
all three of us. That's funny.
That's what we do.
How about you go, Rabbi?
Okay. I do draw heavily on spiritual practice. Anyone who's familiar with Judaism, there's a lot of spiritual practice, and there's no. I think that's sort of why we're called the people of the book, because we have a lot of them. And in our morning liturgy, I find comfort in the fact that people who are praying, Jews that are praying in the morning, are reading the same text, because that's one way that we have been able to sustain, to survive, is by having an order of prayer that is, I could pretty much walk into any synagogue in the world and be able to understand the prayer as long as they are using Hebrew and not a secular language. And our morning prayers start off with blessings of gratitude. Like, you wake up in the morning and you can be like, this day sucks. Or you can say, wow, how awesome is this day? And even if you believe that this day sucks, once you start praying with blessings of gratitude, the first one being, thank you, divine source of all, for restoring my soul and breathing life into me. And you, God, are awesome. And then you move to other blessings that are about gratitude, and other blessings that, we're thanking, our blessings for the body, and blessings for breathing, and blessings for the fact that birds can tell the difference between day and night. And then we do all of that, and then we come to our call to prayer. And the rabbis of our tradition, I believe, when they did that, before we came to our call to prayer, they did that so that we would be ready and full of gratitude and open to receiving whatever the divine has to offer, and also open to praying what we need to pray for, and so that our hearts would be open and full. That's the sort of spiritual stuff that I draw on. And another piece is that we have lots of texts that say that we are created in the image of the divine, which means that every one of us has a holy spark, and that holy spark from us is also in the divine. And that when we remember that each of us are holy beings, we shouldn't be hating people. We're all related. That means we're all kin. We are all related. And then the last thing I'll say is that another thing that I've been drawing on is that we have another text that's in the Talmud that says that if you destroy a life, anyone who destroys a life, it's as if you have destroyed an entire world. And anyone who saves a life is as if they have saved an entire world. So those are the things that I've been leaning on. Thank you.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to just lean into all of that. It is prayer, and it is solitude. It is listening for the divine. And I preached during Mother's Day, so it is the Divine Mother, and it is divine spirit, because we all birthed through a mother. I am my approach for practicing the faith is looking at the ancestors, and those ancestors that fought valiantly to protect life in their villages, in their cities, in their homes, in their communities. I call on the spirit of Harriet Tubman. I have my DNA taken, and I have 500 to 2,000 years on my matrilineal side of women of the Yoruba and Hausa. And I take from that I'm supposed to be here. And so my spiritual practice is calling on those warriors, Fannie Lou Hamer, and I call on the warriors of Sojourner Truth. I call on the warriors of Queen Nzinga. I call on those names that fought valiantly, that fought, and even the unknown, my own ancestors who were enslaved. I'm 5th generation from Mississippi. I'm from Chicago. But those who survived the Middle Passage. And we think about our DNA, which is passed through the mother. That DNA survived the Middle Passage. So another powerful, sacred way of being in the world is to look at how do we pass on our DNA? And if it's not biologically, how do we do that through our faith practices? How do we stand before our daughters and our sons in all communities? How do we learn about the 4 winds in Native culture? How do we sit with our Muslim sisters and brothers? How do we call on even our own ancient practices, both revolution and peace, both healing and truth-telling? Those are all part of our spiritual practices. And I believe in this moment, if we are not telling more truths about where we need to be as a community of faith and as people of faith, and as we look at the text that I love so much is Isaiah 61, because in Luke 4, Jesus gets up and speaks from that text. And when he drops that scroll, I call it dropping, he may have placed it, and he placed it in the hands of the one who gave it to him. The people got so angry that they wanted to drive him off a cliff. So how do we continue to be prophetic and talk about the ways in which the reality of preaching a dangerous sermon, of speaking about truth to power, those are also spiritual practices. And I believe that if we continue to dig more deeply into both the revolutionary aspects and those who are the protectors of this planet, and are watching us and waiting for us, who will go? Who shall I send? And so I'm ready always to be sent, and grateful to be here, because it is not just me that's doing this work. Everyone that I see right here, we're doing this work. But I believe if we sit together and we develop some short and long-term strategies that help us move forward and to think clearly, because the adversaries are not thinking about faith, they're thinking about power and domination. And so I would hope that we would have further conversations beyond this moment, so that we can develop some common spiritual practices and share the ways in which we will do this and stay in the work.
This is awesome. Lisa, Sharon, Harper.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jen. And I'm honestly, I'm listening to each one speak the sermon. It's a collective sermon, actually. And I'm just really grateful for this sermon today. You're filling my heart. I would like to just add that in the book Fortune, I close the book with 3 chapters that really talk about the spiritual practices that will be necessary for us to heal, to repair what race, this construct, this human hierarchy of belonging broke in the world. And I loved the word about the reality that ultimately this is really not even about, white supremacy or that supremacy or that. It's actually about colonization, that ultimately we're talking about a colonizing world and a post-colonizing world. And colonization is all about domination for the purpose of extraction of resources, for the purpose of filling one's own bank account. And that's what we saw with those first race laws. That's what we saw with the 3/5 Compromise, and then the 1877 Compromise, and the pushback after the Civil Rights Movement, and mass incarceration. That is really what we are still in the midst of. And so in order for us to heal, in order for us to reach that beloved community that Valerie talked about so beautifully, we will really have to engage in a massive and determined and intentional truth seeking, truth listening, and truth telling project in America. We have to begin to turn around the narrative, or to reconcile the narratives that have shaped our world. Narrative shapes worldview, worldview shapes vote, and vote shapes the world. And so as we look at really just this next few months, I'm looking toward President Biden to say yes to an executive order that calls on our nation to engage in a spiritual practice of truth-telling, a truth commission, the TRHT in particular. And I'm calling on President Biden, and I'm looking for him to begin to say yes to HR 40, an executive order form of HR 40. I believe that an executive order that would actually put forward a commission to study what repair would require for our nation. What would it look like for us to actually invest in transforming the United States of America, transforming and dismantling the hierarchies of human belonging that our laws and our structures, our institutions, and our cultural mores have built over 500 years? What would that require? It would require a massive amount of input. You know, all that money that we found in our coffers to send to Ukraine, we can then find money to begin to rebuild a transformed America. And I have many Ukrainian friends, and I believe in the project of democracy there. But I know that we cannot actually fully defeat Putin until we have our own integrity, that we have done the work to fully finish the work of decolonizing the United States of America. And that will require not only truth-telling, but also reparation. And ultimately, if we're going to reach that beloved community, it will also require of all of us some measure of forgiveness in order to live in community with each other, and in light of the things that cannot be repaired, the things that can never be restored. The communities, like my own great-grandfather's community, he owned a block of homes here in South Philadelphia. But that block of homes was snatched by eminent domain, and that community broken up, and that community will never come back together again. And if I am to be well in the midst of this community, I then have to release the white folk from the demand and the debt that they owe me, and then turn to God and say, okay, God, now you ante up, you move the mountains, you move the legislation that can actually rebuild community and fill our community with that what was taken. So remember, reparation comes first. That which can be given, that which can be repaired, must be repaired. And then we work toward our healing.
Now we're getting into some action steps. So thank you for the disciplines and the healing, and also the TRHT and some of the legislative pieces. I'd like to call forward Mia Coward with Faith in Public Life, who has another action step to let people know about. Mia.
Thanks so much, Jen. Before I actually do the action step, I think Robert wanted to say something right before, so I'll recede and then I'll let him go ahead and then come back.
Right. I'm going to be very quick. I love this idea of a collective sermon. And in my Baptist tradition, this is the altar call. If I'm speaking last here before we go to action. So Lisa, we'll take the ball and just say something very brief, but I do want to speak to the white Christian audience here, because I think we've got a different role to play. I love all the stuff around healing, forgiveness. On the white side of the equation, there's repentance. And I just want to kind of hold that up here. And this sense, right? That thing I said, I need white people to be better, and we need to face kind of what's inside of us. And one thing that has struck me this last weekend, especially, is so many of my friends who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, have said those victims look like me. That could have been me. I can imagine it being my grandmother, my father, my sister, my aunt, my uncle. White people don't do that. Right? Because those victims, by and large, don't look like us. But what struck me is that the murderer, the shooter, the terrorist does look like me. And I just want to kind of hold that and sort of ask my fellow white Christians to hold that, right, as part of our work. in this, and we're not gloss over that, not move past it. But what would happen if every time this happens, we white Christians collectively say, that murderer looks like me, and what am I going to do?
Thank you, Dr. Robert Jones, for that heavy word and truth. Mia.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Robert, and just many thanks and gratitude for this esteemed panelist of leaders that were able to come together for this moment, as it also saddens me that we're here yet again. But as Dr. Lewis shared in the beginning of this convening, our prayers should be that as we grieve, we also stand against the division of whiteness that plagues us all. And as Dr. Love and Valerie reminded us, we must find ways to move forward, to understand, to realize how to support in a collective way that prioritizes communities of color through our faith. So I first want to share, I know we're running on time, but I want to share how our viewers can get involved with our partners, Voice Buffalo, that are on the ground in the community right now working for social justice and equity. And right now they have a list of demands for the state. One being providing fully funded mental health and healing services for Buffalo Manson neighborhood, supporting families that are impacted and the residents through crime victim funds, leveraging unused money from the American Rescue Plan to fund the community centers that is in that community, and then fully funding violence intervention programs. And so these are the demands of the community. And our team is going to put in the chat the link that you can go and support this community, support those leading that fight on the ground. And then I'll end with Faith in Public Life has put together a sign-on, because we know in this moment that the collective of all faith leaders is important. Their voice being heard is important. And so our team is also going to put in our sign-on that we have. We're asking that all faith leaders that have joined us today add their prophetic voice to this call. Let media personalities and our elected officials know, as Lisa shared earlier, enough is enough, and really commit to confronting white Christian nationalism in order to prevent and stop identity and political-based violence that occurred in Buffalo, that's occurred across the country. And so those are the two ways to take action with us today. And I will turn it back to Reverend Butler and Valerie to close us out. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again for this esteemed panel, Dr. Lewis and Paisha as well.
Thank you so much, Mia, for that. And we will be following up with all of this in writing and with links to our esteemed panelists and the work that they're doing. And I have learned so much, I was reflecting along the lines of Dr. Robert Jones, that I grew up in a white church in the South, and the ways in which we were speaking of spiritual disciplines in this gathering were not the spiritual disciplines that I grew up with or was taught. And it's been a lifelong journey to learn those. And it is my fervent hope for white Christians who didn't, that they will start to reclaim their tradition and to talk to their families and communities so that there is transformation and reground themselves in the faith. Many of us are walking away, and yet reclaiming in partnership and multi-faith partnership, learning from each other's faith traditions is so enlivening and can give us courage and wisdom to move forward. And so with that, I'll call on my sister Valerie Kaur to close us in a Sikh prayer.
I invite you to place your feet on the earth. Just notice your feet on the earth. This earth that connects us. As we've heard, each of us has a distinct and specific role to play in this moment. Repentance, or solidarity, or grieving, or healing. Only you know what your role is, know what is calling you. And so this prayer that I want to offer you is one around courage, to follow the call when it comes. It's a prayer written by the 10th Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, who was born into a time of war and trauma and siege. He lost to everyone he loved. He lost his 4 sons, he lost his wife, he lost his mother, he lost his father to the cruelty of empire, and yet he still found a way to sing. So I'm singing you the song for courage, for love, And as I sing it, I invite you to place your hand on your heart, feel the earth beneath your feet, whatever ancestors you would like called to their backs. And you don't need to know all the words or understand them to let the sounds, the ancient sounds, fill you with that energy, with that spirit. It means, oh, divine around us and within me, may you give me the courage to not hold back from doing good. You ready? Let it come. Let it go. Deho Shiva Baramo e ahe Shubhakara manate kabahu nataro nadaro arasyo jabajaye laro Nische kare apani hi jeeta karo Bole soneha Sat Sri Akal. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves.
Amen. Thank you all so much for this time together. So enlivening, so enriching. And thank you to our participants. May we go forth in courage and in peace to meet this world. Amen.